Today we're going to introduce the muscular system. So muscles are responsible for all types of body movement, and there are three basic types of muscle tissue that are found in the human body. There is skeletal muscle, cardiac muscle, and smooth muscle, and they each have kind of different jobs in different locations. Both skeletal and smooth muscle cells are elongated, so they're longer than they are wide for sure. And one muscle cell is equal to a muscle fiber. So those two terms are synonyms. Contraction and shortening of the muscle is due to structures inside of the muscle called microfilaments. And we will go over the contraction of muscle in another lecture in the future. All muscles do share some terminology. If you have a prefix of myo or mice, those both refer to the word muscle, and then the prefix sarco refers to flesh. And so all of those prefixes would be found in muscular cell types and other muscular related terms. So you'll see that particular term mice a lot when we talk about muscle, because like there's the endomysium, epimysium, and paramysium, which are all part of the structure of a muscle, and you can see it from different angles too. Here we can compare the three different types of muscle. So skeletal muscle is muscle that's attached to bone or skin. If you are making facial expressions and can talk, then you know you have muscle attached to skin, right? Cardiac muscle is found in the walls of the heart only and nowhere else in the human body. And then smooth muscle is found in the walls of visceral organs. So those are organs that have some sort of luminar opening on the inside. So vessels that carry blood have smooth muscle in the wall. Your stomach, small intestine, large intestine, all of those things have smooth muscle in the walls of those organs. The cells do look a little bit differently from each other as well. Skeletal muscles are very long cylindrical cells. Sometimes they're multinucleate, so they have more than one nucleus in each cell, and they have very obvious striation or stripes. Cardiac muscle are branching cells. They are uninucleate, so they have one nucleus per cell. They are also striated, but they have these other structures called intercalated discs that you can see under microscopes that connect the cells to each other. And then smooth muscle, those are single cells, they're fusiform, they're also uninucleate, but there are no striations. And so they look different from skeletal and cardiac muscle in that way. Then we can talk about connective tissue components. So skeletal muscle is connected to itself and to other structures by the endomysium, paramysium, and epimysium. And so we'll talk about kind of those levels of organization in a skeletal muscle in just a minute. And then the cardiac muscle only has the endomysium, and smooth muscle only has the endomysium. So these kind of levels of organization where you have endo, peri, and epimysium are only found in skeletal muscle. Next, we'll talk a little bit about regulation of contraction. Skeletal muscle can be contracted voluntarily. That's pretty important because that gives you control over when your muscles contract. Cardiac muscle, on the other hand, is involuntary, so you do not control your cardiac muscle volitionally. You have a brainstem that takes care of that, and it does it on its own. You never have to think about making your heart beat. And then smooth muscle is also involuntary, so those muscles contract when, like, your brainstem tells them to or a reflex tells them to, not when you want them to contract. Speed of contraction is also variable. Skeletal muscle can contract slowly or quickly depending on what it is that you're doing, your activity. Cardiac muscle always contracts slowly, and smooth muscle contracts very slowly. So cardiac and smooth muscle are a lot less variable in contraction rate than skeletal muscle is. And then skeletal muscle does not contract rhythmically. It contracts when you tell it to. Cardiac muscle always contracts rhythmically because it's responding to something called the sinoatrial node in your heart that causes it to contract in a regular cadence or rhythm. And then smooth muscle can contract rhythmically depending on which type of muscle it is. Like, for example, the muscle in your blood vessels contracts rhythmically because that's why you can feel a pulse. Now we're going to go into depth a little bit more about skeletal muscle. So most skeletal muscles are attached by tendons to bones. Most muscles cross a joint. So the tendons are usually what crosses the joint, and then the belly of the muscle is above or below the joint, depending on where it causes the joint to bend. The cells, again, in skeletal muscle are also multinucleate, so they have more than one nucleus in each cell. And again, they are striated, so they have banding or stripes, and they're voluntary, meaning that they are subject to conscious control, so you can control when those muscles contract. Now we're going to talk about those levels of organization in muscle tissue. So there's a bunch of connective tissue, and that's what forms the endomysium, paramysium, and epimysium. And then it runs through the length of the muscle. So the endomysium is connective tissue that goes around each single muscle fiber. So every single muscle fiber or muscle cell is surrounded by the endomysium. Then the paramysium wraps around what we call a fascicle, or a bundle of muscle fibers. So you've got a group of muscle fibers. Each of them has an endomysium individually, and then a bundle of those fibers form a fascicle surrounded by paramysium. And then the epimysium covers the entire muscle. So you have many fascicles that work together to make a skeletal muscle, and they are wrapped in the epimysium. And then you have something called the fascia, and that's on the outside of the epimysium. So all of that connective tissue runs end to end through the muscle, and it helps to provide a lot of strength for that muscle, and it also is what we use to form tendons at the ends of muscles that lack muscle cells but contain all of that connective tissue. So in this diagram, you can see you've got a muscle fiber, and the muscle fiber is wrapped in the endomysium that goes around each individual fiber. Then the next level of organization is the fascicle, and that is a bundle of muscle fibers or muscle cells, and it's wrapped by the paramysium. Then you've got this whole thing. This is the entire muscle, and the entire muscle is wrapped in the epimysium. So the epimysium goes around the entire muscle. So those are the three levels of organization. You have endomysium around each cell, paramysium around a fascicle, and epimysium around the entire muscle. And all of that connective tissue is what forms the tendon, and that is where a muscle attaches to bone. So the muscle cells stop before they end of the muscle, and just that connective tissue that runs the length of the muscle is what attaches that muscle to the bone. So as we just mentioned, the epimysium blends into a connective tissue attachment, so that's the tendon. So tendons are cord-like structures. They're made mostly of collagen. They often cross a joint because they're very tough and they're not very large. If the belly of your muscle crossed the joint, your joint range of motion would be smaller because you'd have something very large, the belly of the muscle, blocking the movement of that joint. So connective tissue crosses joints, and then the belly of your muscles are located usually on top of the bone. Aponeuroses are sheet-like structures, and they also attach muscles indirectly to bones, cartilages, or connective tissue coverings. So sometimes you have a sheet of connective tissue that muscles can attach to, and they can move like your skin and things like that. Muscles can attach to more than one thing inside of your body, right? So lots of muscles attach to bones. Those are the ones that are generally going to provide a lot of movement, but muscle can also attach to cartilage or connective tissues like those aponeuroses. So now we're going to move on to smooth muscle. Again, smooth muscle lacks striations. The cells are spindle-shaped, so they're pointy on both ends typically. They are single nucleated or uninucleate. They are involuntary, so there's no conscious control of smooth muscle. And again, they're found mainly in the walls of hollow organs. So any organ that has an open space inside of it, whether it's a blood vessel or your stomach, is going to have smooth muscle in the walls. So here's what smooth muscle looks like when it's in the wall of an organ. This looks like it's probably your small intestine. So there's a circular layer of smooth muscle in your small intestines, for example, and that circulator goes around the whole muscle. And then there's also a longitudinal layer, and that's the one that's here, and it is longitudinal across the organ. and so it runs perpendicular to the circular level. And then inside of that is the mucosa of the organ. So depending on what its job is, it might be lined with just smooth epithelium cells like a blood vessel, or it might be, like the small intestine, where you've got a large surface area and absorptive cells. And then we're also going to talk about cardiac muscle. Again, cardiac muscle has striations, so it's striped. It kind of looks like skeletal muscle with some differences. Again, this has uninucleate or has a single nucleus. In cardiac muscle, it looks different because the cells are branching. So that's a big difference between cardiac muscle and skeletal muscle. And then they're joined to other muscle cells at the intercalated disc. So cardiac muscle is different because like one cardiac muscle cell does not run the length of the entire contractile unit of the heart. The cells are shorter and connected to each other at intercalated discs. And then the cardiac muscle is involuntary, and it's found only in the walls of the heart. So cardiac muscle is only in one place in your body. When cardiac muscle wraps around your heart, this is what it looks like. And the cells are all connected to each other, and they all contract together. So when your brain tells your sinoatrial node for your heart to pump, all of those muscles contract together at one time, and that allows the whole heart to contract and push blood out. If the heart is not contracting each cell together, that's called fibrillation. So if you've ever heard of somebody who has to get shocked with a defibrillator, it's because each heart muscle cell is contracting on its own and not together as a unit, and that's deadly. And so you need to defibrillate the heart to ask all of those cells to contract together again so that the heart can pump efficiently. And then those skeletal muscle functions, now we're back to skeletal muscle, this is the end of the lecture, we'll move on later, is to produce movement, so they allow you to walk, stand, etc. It helps you to maintain posture, so like if you're able to sit up straight all day long, with skeletal muscle, it's helping you do that. They stabilize joints, and so your joints, and so they don't fall out of alignment, your muscles help that to occur, and they also generate a lot of heat. So one of the reasons that your body can maintain a constant temperature in the face of a changing external environment is because your muscles produce a lot of heat, and that's what keeps your body around 98 or 99 degrees typically.